The moment my mother laughed and said, "Why can't you be more like your siblings?" in front of everyone, something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deep enough that I knew our relationship would never be the same again. It happened at a family gathering, one of those gatherings where everything looks perfect from the outside. Warm lights, smiling faces, people pretending they care. And me sitting there, already feeling small before she even opened her mouth. I didn't expect praise, I never did, but I also didn't expect family humiliation to be served like entertainment. She didn't just compare me to my siblings, she listed my failures like bullet points, my career, my relationship status, my choices. Each sentence landed harder than the last, wrapped in that familiar tone that always sounded concerned but felt like emotional abuse. Everyone laughed awkwardly. No one stopped her. That's the thing about public comparison. It's not just words, it's a performance, and you're the punchline. Growing up, I was the different one. My siblings followed the expected path: stable careers, approval, applause. I chose something else, something slower, something uncertain, something that actually felt like me. And for that, I became the family disappointment. At least, that's the role they assigned me. My mother had a talent for making cruelty sound like love. She called it motivation, she called it honesty. But years of subtle insults, constant comparison, and dismissive comments slowly taught me one thing: my worth was always measured against someone else. This wasn't the first time, but this was the first time she did it publicly. And something about that night changed how I saw everything. I smiled, I stayed quiet, I did what I had always done to survive. But inside, I felt that familiar mix of shame and anger twisting together, the kind that doesn't explode right away, the kind that waits. People think emotional abuse only counts when there are screams or threats. They don't talk about the quiet kind, the kind that makes you question your value while everyone else nods along. For years, I told myself this was normal, that this was just how families were, that comparison was harmless. But sitting there, listening to her praise my siblings while tearing me down, I finally understood something painful. This wasn't love, this was control, and control always has consequences. I didn't confront her that night. I didn't defend myself. I didn't make a scene. I just watched, listened, and started seeing patterns I had ignored my entire life. That was the beginning of my revenge story. Not the loud kind, not the reckless kind, the quiet kind that starts with clarity. Because when someone humiliates you in public, they never expect you to remember every detail. After that night, nothing changed on the surface, and that was the most unsettling part. My mother didn't apologize. She didn't bring it up again. Instead, she acted as if nothing had happened, as if the public comparison, the family humiliation, had only existed in my head. That's how the emotional abuse always worked: quiet, polished, deniable. When I tried to talk about it later, she smiled softly and said, "You're too sensitive. I was just being honest." Honest. That word became her favorite weapon. She started doing it more subtly after that. Small comments disguised as concern, questions that weren't really questions. "Are you sure this career path is working out for you? Your sister already bought a house, you know. I just worry about you ending up alone." Each sentence sounded harmless on its own. Together, they formed a pattern. My siblings never stepped in. They didn't have to. They benefited from the comparison. Whenever I achieved something, even something small, it was minimized. When my siblings succeeded, it became a family event. I started doubting myself again, not because I believed her, but because repetition is powerful. That's the dangerous part of emotional abuse. It doesn't break you all at once. It erodes you slowly until you're unsure where your voice ends and theirs begins. She also began sharing my concerns with extended family. Private conversations somehow became public knowledge. Suddenly, people were giving me advice I never asked for, judging choices I never explained. Another layer of family humiliation, carefully disguised as care. I noticed how she framed herself as the victim. I'm just worried about her. I don't know what I did wrong as a mother. And just like that, I became the problem. If I stayed quiet, I was ungrateful. If I spoke up, I was dramatic. Classic manipulation, a no-win situation. There were moments I almost confronted her, moments my heart raced and my mouth opened. But something stopped me. I started observing instead of reacting, listening instead of defending. I noticed inconsistencies, contradictions, little lies told so often they began to unravel. She forgot what she had told people. She exaggerated stories. She reshaped reality depending on who was listening. That's when the fog lifted. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't concern. This was control through comparison. And suddenly, the anger I had been suppressing shifted into something colder, something calmer. I stopped explaining myself, stopped seeking validation, stopped trying to earn approval that was never meant to be given. That scared her. When you stop reacting, manipulators panic. She asked why I was distant, why I didn't share anymore, why I seemed different. I smiled and said everything was fine, because by then, my revenge story had already begun, even if she didn't know it yet. And the most powerful move I made was staying silent long enough to see the truth clearly. The next family event was where everything crossed a line. It was supposed to be a celebration, one of those gatherings meant to showcase success, happiness, and unity. At least that's what it looked like on the outside. I walked in already guarded, quiet, observant, prepared for subtle remarks, but not for what actually happened. Halfway through dinner, my mother raised her glass. Her tone was cheerful, almost playful. She started talking about my siblings, their promotions, their achievements, their smart choices. The room listened. Then she turned to me. "Well," she said with a laugh, "not everyone can keep up, right?" The table went silent for half a second, just long enough. Then came the smiles, the nervous chuckles, the looks that pretended to be sympathetic. That pause said everything. This wasn't an accident. This was family humiliation carefully timed and publicly delivered. She went further. She mentioned things I had never shared publicly, selective details, half-truths, enough to make me look irresponsible without saying it outright. I felt heat rise in my face, not from shame, from clarity. This was no longer just emotional abuse. It was a performance. I glanced at my siblings. One avoided eye contact. The other smiled politely, like none of this concerned them. And that's when it hit me. They weren't neutral, they were complicit. By staying silent, they had chosen their side. My mother framed it all as humor. That was her shield. If I reacted, I'd be the problem. If I stayed quiet, she'd win. So I did something unexpected. I laughed. Softly, calmly, and said nothing else. That confused her. She expected tears, anger, defensiveness. Instead, I finished my meal, thanked everyone, and left early. On the drive home, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from realization. This wasn't about helping me improve. This wasn't love. This was about control, status, and narrative. And I had been cast as the failure in a story she enjoyed telling. That night, messages started coming in. Relatives checking in, friends asking if I was okay. Some offered sympathy, others offered advice I didn't ask for.
The damage was done, but so was the clarity. I stopped trying to correct the story, stopped explaining context, stopped defending my choices. Because here's the thing about people who publicly humiliate you: they rely on your reaction to justify their behavior. I decided she wouldn't get one anymore. Instead, I started documenting everything: dates, conversations, who heard what and when. Not for revenge, at least that's what I told myself, but deep down I knew this was becoming something else. A revenge story doesn't begin with anger, it begins with understanding the game. And that night, sitting alone in my car, I finally understood exactly how it was being played. The breaking point didn't come with shouting, it came quietly, the way the most painful realizations usually do. A few weeks after that dinner, I was visiting an aunt I hadn't seen in years. We were talking casually, nothing serious, until she said something that stopped me cold. She said, "I heard you're struggling financially. I hope you're doing okay." I stared at her, because that wasn't true, not even close. I asked where she had heard that. She hesitated, then said my mother's name. That was the moment everything clicked. The public comparisons weren't isolated. The comments weren't spontaneous. The family humiliation wasn't just happening at gatherings. It was being carefully planted behind my back. Conversations I thought were private had been reshaped, my uncertainty exaggerated, my choices framed as failures, all under the banner of concern. This wasn't clumsiness, this wasn't misunderstanding, this was a pattern of emotional abuse designed to control how others saw me and how I saw myself. I drove home in silence. No music, no phone, just the sound of my own breathing getting heavier with every mile. For years, I had blamed myself for not being enough, for being different. Now I understood why I always felt on trial. The truth wasn't just painful, it was humiliating. I remembered every moment I had defended her to others, every excuse I had made, every time I convinced myself she meant well. And suddenly the grief hit, not just for what she had done, but for the relationship I thought we had. I cried that night. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to let something leave my body. There was anger, yes, but underneath it was something heavier: acceptance. I wasn't dealing with a misunderstanding. I was dealing with someone who needed me small to feel powerful. That realization changed everything. I didn't call her, didn't confront her, didn't demand explanations, because I already knew what she'd say. "You're imagining things. You're twisting my words. I only ever wanted what's best for you." Gaslighting had a script, and I knew it by heart. Instead, I sat with the truth, let it settle, let it hurt, and in that quiet, something else formed. Not rage, not revenge, not yet. Resolute. I stopped craving her approval, stopped trying to prove my worth, stopped explaining my life to people who had already made their minds. That's when the silence between us began, and she felt it immediately. She called more often, asked more questions, pushed harder, because when control slips, manipulators tighten their grip. But I didn't react. I was done breaking, and I was finally ready for the part of this revenge story she would never see coming.
My revenge didn't start with confrontation. It started with withdrawal. I stopped correcting her stories, stopped chasing understanding, stopped reacting to the family humiliation she seemed to thrive on. Instead, I became boring. No explanations, no emotional reactions, no visible resistance. That unsettled her. People like my mother don't fear anger, they fear indifference. I began choosing carefully what I shared and with whom. Important details disappeared from our conversations. Plans became vague. Emotions stayed neutral. At the same time, I started strengthening my life quietly. I focused on my work, took opportunities I'd once doubted myself out of, built stability without announcing it. This wasn't about proving her wrong, it was about removing her leverage. The funny thing about emotional abuse is that it only works when the abuser has access to your inner world. Once that door closes, their influence fades. She noticed changes immediately. "You never tell me anything anymore," she said one day, her voice tight. "I worry you're pushing the family away." There it was again, concern as control. I smiled and said I was just busy. Meanwhile, I let her talk. I listened, and I documented every contradiction, every exaggerated story she told about me and about others, because people who manipulate narratives always forget who they told which version to. Slowly, her stories stopped lining up. She told one relative I was irresponsible, another that I was overwhelmed, someone else that I was secretive. The image she was crafting became messy, and people started noticing, without me saying a word. I also stopped defending my siblings, not because I blamed them, but because I stopped protecting the illusion. When relatives asked why I didn't attend certain gatherings, I answered calmly, "No drama, I just needed space." No accusations, no explanations. That simplicity made others uncomfortable, in a good way, because suddenly the contrast was clear. I wasn't emotional, I wasn't unstable, I wasn't defensive. I was peaceful, and that didn't match the story my mother had been telling. The revenge story wasn't about exposing her, it was about letting her exposure happen naturally. She began pushing harder, making comments more openly again, but this time people hesitated before laughing, before agreeing. Some even changed the subject. Power shifts like that don't happen loudly, they happen when someone loses credibility. I didn't need to confront her. I just needed to stop participating in the game she controlled. And the more I stayed silent, the more space she gave herself to unravel. Karma didn't arrive with an argument. It arrived with confusion. The first sign was subtle. My mother started repeating herself, revising stories mid-sentence, correcting details no one had questioned. At first, people brushed it off. Then it happened again, and again. At a small family lunch, she mentioned how concerned she was about my unstable work situation. An uncle frowned. "I thought you said she was doing well now," he said. She laughed too quickly. "Oh, well, it changes," she replied. The room shifted. That's the thing about long-term family humiliation. Eventually, the narrative gets too complicated to maintain. I sat there quietly, saying nothing. Someone else asked how my life was going. I answered simply, calmly, honestly. No defensiveness, no oversharing. Just enough truth to contradict the story without challenging anyone. The silence afterwards was heavy. People started comparing notes without realizing it. Stories didn't align, details didn't match. The image my mother had carefully built, the worried parent, the struggling daughter, began to fracture. She felt it. You could see it in the way she watched reactions now. Measured laughs, careful pauses. Her confidence was gone. The next gathering was worse for her. She made a comment about me still figuring things out. This time, no one laughed. Someone changed the subject. Another defended me casually. "Well, she seems happy." Happy. That word landed harder than any confrontation ever could, because it wasn't part of the script. The emotional abuse lost its power the moment people stopped playing along. Later, I heard through someone else that relatives were confused, some even concerned, but not about me, about her. They questioned why she spoke so negatively, why she seemed obsessed with comparison, why she always needed an audience. And suddenly, the role she had assigned me started reflecting back onto her. She called me one evening, her voice tense. "I feel like people are judging me," she said. "I don't understand why." I listened. I didn't reassure her, didn't argue, didn't explain. I said I was sorry she felt that way, and ended the call. That was the moment I knew.
Karma doesn't always punish, sometimes it reveals. Her influence depended on repetition and reaction. Without my participation, the pattern exposed itself. I didn't win by defeating her. I won by stepping out of the role she needed me to play and watching others see the truth on their own. That's the most satisfying kind of revenge story, the one where you don't have to say a word.
The strangest part wasn't the distance that grew between us. It was the peace. For the first time in my life, I wasn't bracing myself before family gatherings. I wasn't rehearsing explanations in my head. I wasn't trying to prove my worth. The family humiliation stopped, not because she changed, but because it no longer worked. When people lose their audience, they lose their power. My relationship with my mother became quieter, shorter conversations, neutral topics. No intimacy, no control. And oddly enough, that boundary brought clarity. I didn't hate her. I didn't need revenge anymore. I understood her. She needed comparison to feel secure. She needed hierarchy to feel important. And I had been the easiest role to assign, the one who didn't fight back. That understanding didn't excuse the emotional abuse, but it freed me from internalizing it. I also saw my siblings differently, not as enemies, but as participants in a system that rewarded silence. We weren't close after everything, but we were honest. And honesty, even when uncomfortable, is better than pretending. The biggest change was internal. I stopped shrinking in rooms, stopped apologizing for my choices, stopped measuring myself against people who weren't living my life. I learned that love without respect isn't love, it's control. And respect starts the moment you decide your value doesn't need approval. This revenge story didn't end with triumph or applause. It ended with freedom. Freedom to define myself. Freedom to choose peace over performance. Freedom to walk away from narratives that never belonged to me. If there's one thing I wish I had known earlier, it's this. You don't win by humiliating someone back. You win by no longer being affected. Silence, when chosen intentionally, can be the loudest boundary of all. Some people will never apologize. Some families will never acknowledge the harm they caused. But healing doesn't require their permission. It only requires your decision. I didn't become colder, I became clearer. And that clarity changed everything. So now I want to ask you something, and really think about it. If someone in your life kept comparing you, quietly tearing you down, shaping how others saw you, would you fight back, or would you walk away and let the truth speak for itself? Because sometimes the strongest response isn't revenge, it's reclaiming your peace. I used to think closure meant an apology, a confession, someone finally admitting they were wrong. Now I know better. Closure doesn't come from people who hurt you. It comes from the moment you stop waiting for them to change. This story wasn't about winning. It wasn't about humiliating anyone back. It was about surviving family humiliation, recognizing emotional abuse, and choosing a life where my worth wasn't decided by comparison. And if you're listening to this and feeling that tight feeling in your chest, if parts of this revenge story feel uncomfortably familiar, then you're not weak, you're not overreacting, and you're definitely not alone. There are so many people quietly carrying the weight of family expectations, silent judgment, and public comparison. People who were taught to stay quiet, smile, and endure, because that's just how family is. But here's the truth no one tells you soon enough. Being related to someone doesn't give them the right to humiliate you. Love without respect isn't love, and peace is something you choose, not something you earn. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been compared, dismissed, or made to feel smaller by the people who should have protected you, take a moment. Breathe.
and remind yourself that your story is still yours to write. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever experienced family humiliation or emotional abuse like this? Did you choose to fight back or walk away? Your comment might be the one someone else needs to read tonight. If you found value in this story, consider giving it a like. It helps more than you think. And if you know someone who might need to hear this, feel free to share it with them. Finally, if you want more real, emotional, slow-burn revenge stories about betrayal, boundaries, and quiet strength, subscribe to the channel. Not for drama, not for noise, but for stories that remind us we're allowed to choose ourselves. Thank you for listening.